Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Lynn. I'm the marketing coordinator for PointClear Solutions. Thank you for joining us. Uh, this afternoon, we're gonna hear a little bit about innovation. And presenting today is Lee Farabaugh, who is our Chief Innovation Officer for both PointClear Solutions and Worry Free Labs. Um, just a little housekeeping stuff. We will be setting aside some time at the end of the presentation to go over some questions that you might have. Please submit as many questions as you'd like. We'll try to squeeze them all in. Um, and if you notice on your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, you should have a chat box at the very bottom there. Feel free to submit your questions that way, and then we'll go through them once the Q&A time arrives. And with that said, Lee, I will let you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. We set this presentation up because innovation is a word that you hear a lot these days. You're probably hearing it everywhere. There's a lot of large companies around that are creating these innovation centers where they're testing new ideas for their brands. Innovation is used to describe all kinds of things these days, from things we haven't seen before, disruptive things. It's in our LinkedIn feeds, it's in the title of articles from Fast Company and Harvard Business Review. But what does it really mean? And more importantly today, the question that I'm going to hope to answer is, what does it mean for us? Like, I consider us on this call, hopefully, regular people. I think that a lot of people equate innovation with invention. And from that viewpoint, to be truly innovative, you have to create something that's really novel, something that's never been seen before. You have to basically invent the equivalent of the iPhone. And the problem with that kind of thinking is that few, if any of us listening today, in fact, few, if any of us in the world, will ever really create anything that hasn't been created before, just reality. So my definition of innovation is a lot broader because it has to be. To me, innovation is about looking closely at all the things we currently take for granted and finding ways to fix them or make them better or just look at them differently. And to me, in our industry, it's a lot about borrowing concepts from other industries and applying them to ours, which at PointClear is healthcare. So, one that I think you could probably easily relate to is Uber. So if you think about Uber, before Uber, everybody just took taxi cabs. And there were things about the taxi experience that probably most people just didn't like. But we just accepted that's the way it was, except for that guy who created Uber. He looked at ride sharing differently. He questioned, okay, why are things done the way they're done? And he mashed up a bunch of stuff that already existed. This idea of livery or being driven around by somebody else in their car, mobile applications, stored payment credentials, ratings, automatic tips, all that kind of stuff. And he created an innovation that's gained a ton of traction. It's also caused a lot of disruption as well, and I don't necessarily mean the good kind. So at PointClear, that's how we think about innovation. We're not trying to create something that's never been created before. We're trying to look at our customers' problems from a different perspective. And we're learning from what others are doing outside healthcare and applying those learnings in novel ways. And we do it from these 5 vantage points. And they are creativity, empathy, discipline, risk, and passion. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to walk you through these 5 elements of innovation and explore them further. So let's start with creativity. Creativity, I think it's probably, it's a key component, obviously, but maybe the most important component of innovation. You have to be able to look at things differently and entertain some wild ideas if you're ever going to initiate change. In his TED Talk, a gentleman named Ken Robinson defines creativity this way. It's the process of having original ideas that have value. And he points out that a really important component of this is having a multidisciplinary way of seeing things. And there's a concept, it was pioneered by the design firm IDEO, and it has as its hallmark that multidisciplinary approach. It's called design thinking. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. But it's successful because it doesn't just involve a bunch of designers sitting around working to solve problems, or worse, maybe even a single lone designer sitting in his or her little room. But it involves lots of people from lots of different areas of business because they bring different perspectives and approaches, and that, to me, is where the gold really is. That's where those approaches can be considered and applied in new ways, and something really novel and interesting can emerge. So let's take a look at how creativity was utilized at NASA.
Gene, we have a situation brewing with the carbon dioxide.
We had a CO2 filter problem on the lunar module.
5 filters on the limb.
Which are meant for 2 guys for a day and a half.
So I told the doctor.
You're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15, you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
They take square cartridges. The ones on the limb are round.
Tell me this isn't a government operation.
This just isn't a contingency we remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapidly.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we got to come through. We got to find a way to make this fit into the hole for this, using nothing but that. So let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build a filter.
Maybe get some coffee going, too.
So the audio might have been a little bit hard to understand there, but essentially, what's happening, as you see in the movie Apollo 13, is they needed to fit a filter into a hole that was for a round filter. They had a square filter and had to fit in the hole for a round filter. And all they had was what the astronauts had with them. And so they had to come up with some solution, and they did. Thank goodness they did. But it was only through this sort of interdisciplinary idea of creativity that they were able to do so. And so in the wake of the Apollo mission, NASA brought on board a researcher named George Land. And what they wanted to do, they didn't have any trouble really coming up with candidates for jobs at NASA who were really smart. That wasn't the problem. They had trouble finding people who were really creative. And so they brought in George Land, and he came up with this test, and it tested the creativity of these engineers. And it was really effective. It helped them understand, exactly how creative people were. And more than that, it was a simple test. So Land got the idea that he would try it on some children. And he tested the imaginative capabilities of children ages 3 to 5 who were enrolled in the early Head Start program. And what he found was that almost all, 98% of those 5-year-olds scored at the level of creative genius, which really just sort of blew them all away. They were like, whoa. And what was even more compelling was that he learned, as he tracked those same people over time, and you switch the slide, Kevin, that by the time they were 10, fewer than 30% of them were still considered creative genius. By the time they were 15, it was just over 10%, and by the age of 31, only 2% of them had retained that creative ability. So what happened? I mean, you're sitting here thinking, oh God, I bet none of us are creative geniuses anymore. We're probably all getting around that age of 31, if not more. So what happens to us? Well, what happens is that as we grow up, we learn that it hurts to fail. And we learn that sometimes people think our ideas are stupid, and they tell us that. And we learn to guard against that. We start doing these internal checks in our minds when we limit our own creativity because we start to introduce the bias that the world has taught us. And to get some of that back, we have to unlearn that. Exactly how we do that is the source of another webinar, but just suffice it to know that we have to unlearn that. So let's look a little bit at the second tenet of innovation, and that is empathy. I want to show you a talk from my good friend Marcus Whitney. He recently did this talk for some students at an all-boys school in Nashville, Tennessee, called Montgomery Bell Academy. And let's hear what Marcus has to say.
When I think about how fortunate I am, both in terms of what other people did for me and what I'm fortunate to be able to do as a leader and serve other people today, I would have to say there's one ability that stands out above every other one, and I would have never imagined it, but it's the ability that we've been talking about all morning. It's the ability called empathy. Raise your hand if you know what the word empathy means. Okay, pretty good. So by definition, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. And that doesn't necessarily sound like a very manly thing to do, to be focused on understanding and sharing the feelings of another human being. But I can assure you that in 2015 and going forward, that is what the world is really about. We're no longer in a factory, industrial-based economy. We're in an innovation economy. We're in a solution economy. We're in a people economy. And what will be more important for you than anything else that you do for the rest of your life will be how well you work with other people. And working with other people doesn't mean in just the work setting. It means out on the field. It means on the stage. It means around the club table. It means every time you have a chance to interact and collaborate with somebody else, how empathetic are you? For me, empathy is the ability to recognize the importance of feelings and to develop what they call emotional intelligence.
So what Mark has said is that empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another human being. It's a great thing to be creative, even a creative genius. But if you struggle to collaborate with other people, to effectively sell your ideas, or if you don't ever get out of your own garage to find out if what you've created really works for other people, then you're really not that innovative at all, because you're just stuck in your own headspace and you're missing out on a lot of great insight that other people can provide. And so that's a great segue into the next facet of innovation, which I'll call discipline, because it comes from the guru on the discipline of innovation, Peter Drucker. And Drucker wrote this article in Harvard Business Review called The Discipline of Innovation when I was actually still in elementary school. Probably a lot of you same. But I think it's just as meaningful now as it was then because his ideas are really timeless. And he calls innovation the effort to create purposeful, focused change in an enterprise's economic or social potential. So you'll notice he doesn't say anything about inventing or original ideas. It's about change, specifically purposeful, focused change. And he identifies a number of opportunities for innovation. And I love this chart. Screen capture this and paste it on your wall because I think this is just a really great shorthand for innovation opportunities. And you'll see that some of them live inside the walls of your organization and some of them live outside. We can probably all identify examples of these. Most of us are used to almost near-time communication through phone, text, email, Facebook with almost everyone we know. But more often than not, we can't get a hold of our doctors no matter how hard we try. So that's an example of incongruity. And people are innovating in this space all the time with things like secure SMS for healthcare. Another one would be the rise of social media. That's an unexpected occurrence that didn't even exist a decade ago. Now it's a channel for reaching potential customers that's more effective and cheaper than a lot of conventional channels that we all grew up with. It used to be said that online dating was sort of taboo, and if you met your spouse online, you didn't really want to admit it. Now it's more the norm than not. So you can see that opportunities are all around us. A lot of them are the ones that we take for granted. And I saw Mark Cuban speak last week, and he said that he gets tons of pitches from entrepreneurs who say, my idea is so disruptive. And the first thing he asks them is, how do you know that? How many people think so? How many people are willing to pay for it? An idea is not disruptive if it hasn't been tested in the marketplace. The very definition of disruptive is that it actually has to disrupt, and that can only be done in the real world. So that's what Drucker's saying here. He's saying that innovators have to get out and look and ask and listen. Yes, you want to be analytical. You want to look at figures. You want to see, is there a market need? But you also have to go out and look at the potential users to study their expectation, their value, and their needs. And I really think if there's one key takeaway that you get from this webinar today, that is that there is no substitute for getting out in the real world and testing your idea, your product, your app, whatever, with real people, because it will always surprise you. I just got finished earlier this week doing some usability testing with a client, and we did pretty good on our original designs of the app, but we learned a lot of stuff that we would not have learned if we hadn't gone out and asked real people to use the app and what they thought and what was confusing and what they learned and all those sorts of things. So to me, that is the most important aspect of what I'm going to tell you today. So let's look at another tenet of innovation, and that is risk. There's no getting around the element of risk in innovation. Without risk, there's no reward. So let's look at an example of a football coach who is betting on a risky move. He never punts. And I apologize, the video is not great here, but I think you'll be able to get the picture.
All right, guys, here we go. Let's start practice off right. 7-on-7, offense down here. Let's go. Ace, tailback, stack, Z. Z, your other Z. That's just bad. No, ace, tailback, stack. Ace, Chase, for the love of God, son. Too late. God, it's a sucky throw. Serenity now. Just serenity now. I'm the head football coach at Pulaski Academy in Little Rock, Arkansas. I call myself a contrarian thinker. There's a lot of contrarian thinkers in the world that have been highly successful. We approach football in a different way. We rarely ever punt, and we onside kick after every touchdown. My name is Kevin Kelly. I'm known as the coach who never punts. All right, line it up. Let's go. 4th and 3. 4th and 3. Know where the line is. Let's go. Got to get to it. You know, when I started it, I was just trying to find a way to win. In my school, I guess in 36 years, they'd been to the semifinals of the state playoffs twice, and we couldn't get past that. Miles, that's incomplete because you juggled it. You know, I can see it right up in the paper. The news story is, you know, crazy nut job coach going for 4th downs. Zach, you got to make up for it. Hastings isn't here. You got to be the guy. I'm a person that believes that humans make mistakes when they base decisions on emotion. The disruptive moment that's helped make me who I am today was I had a really tough life growing up. I've got a dad that is an alcoholic dad, and, you know, I think he loves me. But there was an incident at home that occurred. I reflect on that at least once a day, I would say. And sometimes it makes me sad, and sometimes it motivates me, and other times I know that it's helped make me who I am. I've always been a numbers person. I majored in accounting my first probably 2.5 years of college when I took over. You know, I thought my job is to help the kids win as many games. And so we started getting inside the game, started asking little things. Why do we eat the way we do? Why is our pregame the way it is? Why do we punt the ball? I ran across a Harvard professor's study that dealt with the numbers and probability of different spots on the field and different values of those, and I realized that people punt the football and they don't need to. Let's say it's 4th down, we start with the football on our own 3-yard line, and we don't make a first down. The other team's going to score a touchdown about 92% of the time. If we punt the ball, the net punt's going to be on average to about the 37-yard line, and they're going to score a touchdown 77% of the time from that point on the field. That's only a 15% difference. If you add those numbers all together, they'll show you that even in extreme situations, inside your own 10-yard line, you should not punt the football. Where are you going, Cootie? Lord, where are you going? 4th and 6, know where the line is, gotta have it, let's go. The kids are the easy ones to convince. They play video games all the time, and they never punt in football games on video games. So they were the easy ones to convince. And then when I showed my coaches, and they realized that it gave us a better chance to win, they were on board. And then the rest, you kind of don't worry about. When I first realized that other coaches really figured out that this was not a one-time gimmicky thing, that this was a philosophy, I thought that was disruptive. Doing something different just to be different, that can't sustain itself. It has to contribute to winning or it falls by the wayside. And now, since I've been the head coach in 11 years, we've been to the semifinals 8 times and been to the finals 5 times and won 3 state championships. Oh, no, I didn't ask what you were going to do. I said why. Because I got tired. Hey, good reason. Y'all get tired, y'all just quit. Finish strong on everything you do. Never quit on anything in your whole life. My kids that are now out in society come back and say is it helps us try to attack problems differently. Not look at the way necessarily everybody else is doing something. You know, there is some success to be had by going and stealing other ideas, but there's also a lot of success to be had from creating your own answers.
So what's the takeaway from Kevin Kelly, the coach who never punts? I'm guessing that you've never seen a coach in college or the NFL to take this approach. But the research that he quotes, which is actually from Berkeley, not Harvard, was based on statistics from the NFL, not from high school football. However, the court of public opinion is a very powerful thing. So if a college or NFL coach goes for it on fourth down, they miss, other team scores, he's going to get blamed and raked over the coals on Monday morning. Think Belichick. At the end of the day, it's safer to punt. That's probably why those guys do it. But if you're willing to take a risk, and like he said, if you're willing to have some original thought, question the way, why are we doing things the way we're doing them? You know, is it just because we've always done it that way, or might we think about it another way? There's a lot of insight that can be gained from that. So let's talk about the last tenet, and that is passion. I read a great book called How to Think Like a 5-Year-Old. In fact, it was really sort of a catalyst for this whole talk because it had some really neat perspective. And one of the things that Lynn Wilson, who wrote this book, talked about was your source of unpeace. And he says that it's a combination of discontent and intrigue. And I like to think it's that thing in your life that you just can't let alone. It's the thing that bugs you so much you have to fix it, and you think you know how to fix it. That thing is your source of unpeace, and it points directly to your passion. Your passion is addressing that source of unpeace. If you are working on something and you feel sort of ambivalent about fixing it or making it better, then you're not working on the right thing. You need to stop and think about what is it really that keeps you up at night. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to find that relatively early in my life. Poor user experiences and bad design of systems just makes me crazy, and I can't stand it, and I have to redesign them. You know, I can't explain it, but luckily I found it, and that's what my life's work is. So I think you have to find that thing. So we talked about the 5 tenets. What does that really mean to you? How can you take this and apply it to what you're doing in your own business? And we ask that same question. We ask ourselves at PointClear and Worry Labs all the time, how can we innovate to create value for our clients? And recently, I think it was back in September, Harvard Business Review came out with a whole issue on the evolution of design thinking. This design thinking approach is something that we have used for a long time. We teach it, we live by it. It's a process of understanding, designing, prototyping, and evaluating. It's multidisciplinary. It's been very successful for us. But you know, here it is on the cover of Harvard Business Review. It's out in the real world. And what we really started thinking about is, you know, what is a design-centric culture, and is it important to create that sort of culture? And I think it is. It's very important within our own walls, and it's very important, I think, in today's economy. Kind of like Marcus said, you know, we're in the innovation economy. Anymore, it's not about price. Because that's kind of, you know, things that have become a commodity are a commodity. These days it's about being creative, being forward thinking, and solving problems that everybody else is taking for granted. So at PointClear, you know, we've established this design-centric culture, and these are the components of it that they mentioned in the Harvard Business Review article. It's focusing on users' experiences. And, you know, yes, we're a software company, but you see people in industries all over the place, automotive, technology, airline. You know, I flew on Southwest the other day, and I got on the plane and realized I had bought some oatmeal at Starbucks, and they didn't give me a spoon. And once you're on the plane, buckled in your seat, you're kind of screwed. And I said to the flight attendant, "Do you have any spoons?" And he said no. And then he got this kind of funny look on his face, and he left. A few minutes later, he comes back. He's gotten off the plane, run up the jetway, run down to Starbucks, grab me a spoon, come back. Those are so powerful to me. You know, a user's experience, a customer's experience. We're all responsible for that, and especially their emotional ones. And in the design-centered culture, we create models to examine complex problems. We prototype things all the time, and you know, you can apply this to your life. You can prototype things in your life. One of the things we struggled with when we first had our child was, okay, how did two working parents get ready in the morning and get a baby ready? And we just didn't know. It was just threw a whole monkey wrench into our world. But we prototyped all these different ways. I get up first versus my husband gets up first versus we get the baby up or then we shower or we shower first. And we just tried all these different ways of doing it. And after about 2 weeks of that, we had it down pat. You know, you have to tolerate failure. It's part of it. You're gonna fail. It hurts. People are gonna tell you your ideas are stupid. They might not like your idea, but it's part of getting traction and moving forward. And especially in a design-centric culture, it's tolerated. It's even encouraged. It's encouraged as a pathway to getting to where you want to be. And lastly, exhibits restraint. So this is one of my favorite things because so often I'm working on projects and the team just wants to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, in. And actually, the beauty of good design is that it is less than more. And so I think a lot of times in a design-centric culture, we need to step back and think about what can we remove versus what can we add. And so, you know, I think that a lot of times we think about design as being just about an interface or the outside of something, but it's really a core competence, and it can be and should be a core competence in all aspects of our business. This idea of design thinking, that we seek to understand, we design, we test, we look back and say, did we get it right? If we didn't, it's okay, we learned something, we're moving forward, and we involve people who have different perspectives from our own. That's really one of the core tenets of a design culture. And so I think one of the takeaways for everyone today should be, how can you find innovation where you are? If there's nothing I hate, it's a webinar that just gives you a bunch of fluffy ideas and doesn't tell you how to apply them. So here's where I think you can take innovation to where you are. As we talked about, fostering a culture of creativity and taking a design thinking, iterative, multidisciplinary approach to solving problems, any kind of problems, doesn't just have to be software problems or interface problems. And don't let innovation just live in a center, even if you have one, even if you're fortunate enough that you work for one of those big companies that has a fancy center with lots of Herman Miller furniture in it. Innovation really has to be a way of life. And then think back on the Drucker example, and that is that you can innovate both inside and outside your walls. So not is it just about how do you innovate for your customers, but at PointClear we always try to think about, okay, how can we innovate our internal processes? Because that turns around and saves money for our customers at the end of the day. You know, how can we do things better? How can we even the most mundane things like recording our time or invoicing our clients, how do we do that in a better and more intuitive and simpler and better experience kind of way? And then this might seem a little counterintuitive to my point about innovation living in the center, but I think it's really important to make a capital investment in physical space that fosters innovation. And that doesn't have to be expensive, but environment is important. And how you structure your internal working environment will directly affect how innovative and collaborative and creative your team is. And the last is use failures as innovation opportunities. You know, sometimes something goes wrong, we explain it away, excuse it away, or we don't even really want to face it. But there's nuggets of truth and goodness and hope in those failures. And if we can really sit down together as a team and say, not only what do we do wrong, and it's not about whose fault is it, but how can we do this better next time? What can we learn? You know, how did we grow from this experience? I think those are really powerful opportunities. So I'll leave you with a final thought from a book I've been reading by Kristen Armstrong, who's the ex-wife of Lance, but a power in her own right. And she's a runner and wrote this book called Mile Markers. And she says, like anything in life you love enough that you want to honor it by being your best. You can't just wing it. Things of passion are not to be checked off a list. You aren't done. These things do not end. There's no star for completion. Even a task well done or a milestone met is not a conclusion. It is simply a transition to a new beginning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lee, for that presentation. At this point, we welcome you to submit any questions that you might have, and we will try and answer them. Okay, so we have a question from Lee Carter. The question is, what's the best way to jumpstart a design-centric culture?
So that's a great question, Lee. Thank you. You know, we touched on it just a second ago. I think that physical space is a really good way to jumpstart that design-centric culture. And I mentioned before that it doesn't have to be expensive. Recently, I guess maybe it's been about 6 months ago, in our Atlanta office, we created a design thinking area. Actually, we did most of the office. We converted this way, and we did it for less than $1,500. And we have a pretty big office. Like, I don't know, it's big. So we did some really fun things where we put whiteboards all over the walls, but they aren't whiteboards that you buy from Staples. They are actually tile backer that you get from Home Depot for like $13 a sheet. But when you put them up on the wall, they are amazing whiteboards. We did some cool things just with paint. We put some collaboration tables out in the middle of the space, and it just fosters that sense of you know, get up out of your desk and sit down with your colleagues and you know, go crazy drawing on the walls. And so I think I am the sort of person who cares very deeply about my environment, and I have to be in an environment that fosters my creativity. And so I think that is a good way to jumpstart a design-centric culture, is to make it feel that way. And I think people will follow suit.
Awesome. And it's funny that your answer, because we have another question here from Jeff. He asks, what environmental changes did PointClear make to encourage these principles? You kind of already touched on those, but I don't know if there's anything additional that you'd like to.
Well, there's a great book, and I'm going to look it up because I think it might help you, Jeff. It might take me a second to find it, but it's a book that talks about, you know, what are some really fun and cheap hacks to create that design-centric environment. And another thing we did with whiteboards was we bought a garment rack off of Amazon. I think it was about $50. And we used that shower or tile backer and zip tied it to the garment rack, and it made a rolling whiteboard for like $75. I mean, those things are like $1,500 if you buy in retail. But we just made one, and I will Google while we get some more questions and find the name of that book and tell you.
Awesome. And actually, just adding on to that, I think I forgot to mention that we will be sending everyone a copy of this presentation, and we can actually include that link whenever Lee does find it, so that you can refer back to it.
I actually did find it, and I pasted it in chat, so you could share it. It's called Make Space, MakeSpace, Make Space, how to set the stage for creative collaboration. There's a lot of crazy hacks in there, fun stuff.
Well, great. Well, if it looks like that's, oh, sorry. So we have a question from Tori Hughes. She asks, can a company be too big to implement innovation?
That's a really good question, Tori. I think the short answer is I don't know. I have spent the past 10 years of my career in, PointClear, and we're a relatively small company. I have been in some big companies. I was at Toyota, and I was at the CDC. And of course, all that was before I really focused on innovation, so I'm trying to think back. I think those big companies have some advantages. Like, those are the companies that can afford to put in an innovation center and have staff and resources that are dedicated to the practice of innovation. So I think to some degree, they have an advantage. I think maybe the disadvantage that they might have is layers of bureaucracy, where, you know, somebody down low on the totem pole has an innovative idea and it's hard to get it up the chain. And so I would say that's something that a big company should be mindful of. But then you look at a company the size of Google, and they implemented that, 20% towards your own projects, and they're incredibly innovative. So I think you know, I guess my answer would be that it has a lot to do with the culture. I think culture, independent of size, would really be the biggest influencer on whether or not a company can be innovative.
Awesome. Let's see if we have any more questions. So it looks like that might be everything. If you haven't thought of a question yet, but one comes to your mind later on, we'll definitely try and answer those via email, or you know, feel free to visit our website. Like I said, we'll try and package all this information so that you can reference it later on at your convenience. So we'll be sending out an email hopefully in the next day or two, so you'll have that handy. But if there aren't any more questions, thanks so much for joining, and we look forward to having our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.